Hello and welcome to Computer Tech and More. This is one of my redone series where I go over fans that I previously did my analysis on with my new noising testing methodology. And well, let's get into it. In this one, we're going to be taking a look at the A12x25 versus the Oddtone. It has another name that's on the box, but it looks a lot like the Noctua, so I decided to combine these two into one video. And as a second disclaimer, with my original noise testing methodology, I was able to achieve plus or minus 4 decibels, so a 8 decibel range. And as a general note, every 10 decibels is a doubling in noise volume, so that is a pretty wide range for accuracy. With my new noise testing methodology, it's plus or minus 2 decibels, which I think is a great improvement. And that is done through a couple different things. One is making sure my house is in a very similar environment, so within 2 decibels of basically each test to the next, as well as now having a fixed distance from the fan to my microphone, as opposed to just trying to get the microphone as close to the fan as possible without actually causing any interference. It was better than eyeballing, but not quite as consistent as what I'm doing now. And the use case for my previous test methodology is still valid, but in a much more limited capacity. If you have an older case where there's a mesh filter almost right in front of the fan, the noise you're going to pick up is going to be similar to my noise testing, in that the fan will be a bit noisier because you actually want some space between the fan and the filter. Otherwise, it's going to be pulling basically a vacuum. You want some air buffer space in there. It's also very similar to if you have the fan at the back of your case, sucking air in. So again, a filter type effect there, or in a pull configuration on many radiators, or even potentially some radiators and AIOs. But the new test methodology is more like an open air environment and is more consistent for push configurations in general. So that's is what we're going to be using going forward. And as a second note, what will take me to the next level? Well, support from viewers like you hitting that subscribe button, as well as joining me on Patreon. So I want to get a better anemometer that is more accurate to be within plus or minus 0.01 meters per second as opposed to 0.1 meter per second. This will greatly improve my accuracy at lower air speeds. Oh my gosh, a pop-up. And the next step would be upgrading my whole testing box so that it'll definitely have no vibrations running through it for fans that are testing within it. Something more solid, a small noise isolating box, and a better dedicated microphone for noise testing as opposed to the one that I'm just recording my voice on right now. But all this is very expensive equipment, and I just can't do without help from viewers like you or a sponsor. So I appreciate any and all support that you're able to would like to provide me if you like this content. Otherwise, we're going to keep doing what I can do as a small, very small YouTuber. Anyways, let's get into the graphs and the data. Before we get into the graphs and the data, I want to show off what the spec information that I could find on this fan were. So it has it has like 2 names, and I know it as the Oddtone. That's what it's listed as on Amazon. And it is basically a bog standard 120 millimeter fan. It uses a fluid dynamic bearing, 12 volts. Power consumption is 0.15 amps. Speed range is 800 to 2,150 RPM. Airflow rated at 67.89 CFM. Static pressure is rated at 2.76 millimeters of H2O. And noise value is rated at 32.2 decibels, and mean time between failure is listed at 150,000 hours. And next to it, I have it compared against the A12x25 because I think they look fundamentally similar. So first, before I go through the different data and the data points, just a brief explanation. So we have the original testing methodology, how the fan ranked, the model number, the RPM was running, and the air speed or CFM value. And same sort of thing with the new testing methodology. Only exception is when we're looking at 100% PWM fan signaling, we also have the noise value that the fan generated. The rankings will change because of the different testing methodology, but they're based off of the same noise normalized type value, but the value is different. So originally it was about 40 decibels based off the A12x25, running at between 1,100 and 1,200 RPM, while the new testing methodology is basically off the A12x25, running at about the same RPM range, and ironically we do see a different airspeed than what I did for the noise normalized testing. They were done on different days, so again there's a little bit of a difference between values on occasion. Alright, so now that we've got explanation out of the way, how did the A12x25 rank in cooler testing noise normalized? Well, originally it was ranked 20th, which is basically in the middle of the pack out of the, I see 48 here, so let's just say 48 120 millimeter fans and then more 150 millimeter fans, but this is only the 120 millimeter category. Just shy of 1,400 RPM and 1.3 meters per second of air. The Oddtone was pushing 12, or was ranked 12th, and was spinning at 1,500 RPM, moving 1.6 meters per second of air. And the new testing methodology, the A12x25 is ranked 7th, and the Oddtone is ranked 31st. So why has this changed? Well, again, the microphone is so close to the fan blade that I think was causing interference with it and causing increased reverberation sounds. So this is how it ranks with the new testing methodology, and this is what I'll be using going forward. So as always, everything needs to be taken with a grain of salt. If I do acquire that better microphone, fan placements may shake up again. But going forward, I use a very similar type testing methodology to this current one. Next up is 100% PWM signal through the AirCooler. How do these fans rank? Well, the A12x25 is ranked 22nd and retains that position. It does not change at 100% PWM fan signaling. And the Oddtone is ranked 32nd. The Oddtone has a much lower maximum RPM, but you'll notice that it is very noisy, actually very similar in noise to the A12x25, and produces less airspeed for that given value. Next up is the cooler value. So this is performance per dollar, and originally the A12x25 was ranked 37th. It is now ranked 30th. The Oddtone was ranked 1st. It is now ranked 10th. So it's an overall loss in position for the Oddtone. Cooler testing at 100% PWM fan signaling, the A12x25 retains its position 42, and the Oddtone retains its position at 13. Moving on to CFM testing, noise normalized. The A12x25 was ranked 14th and is now ranked 4th, so overall a moving up in position and achieves a slightly higher RPM. The Oddtone was ranked 10th and now goes down to 36th. So overall a very poor result for the Oddtone, losing a substantial amount of RPM and thus airspeed. At CFM at 100% PWM fan signaling, the A12x25 is ranked 17th. The Oddtone is ranked 34th. For the value proposition, the A12x noise normalized, the A12x25 is ranked 34th and now is ranked 28th. The Oddtone was ranked 4th and is now ranked 12th. So once again, we're seeing that the Oddtone losing position and the A12x25 gaining position. As for the value proposition at 100% PWM fan signaling, the A12x25 was ranked 37th and retains that position. And moving on to case airflow testing, in my case simulation 6-inch mark noise normalized, the A12x25 was ranked 13th and is now ranked 8th, so overall a great improvement in its result without any change to its airspeed, as can be observed. The Oddtone was ranked 10th and is now ranked 37th, so overall a very poor result for the Oddtone, losing a lot of position. At the 11-inch mark, noise normalized, the A12x25 was ranked 13th and is now ranked 8th, so a great result for the A12x25, moving up in position several places. The Oddtone, on the other hand, was ranked 46th and is now ranked 47th, moving essentially no air at all, 0 meters per second. It was very poor in this test to begin with. For the value proposition, at the 6-inch mark noise normalized, the A12x25 was ranked 35th, is now ranked 24th. The Oddtone was ranked 2nd and is now ranked 13th. For the 11-inch mark noise normalized value proposition, the A12x25 was ranked 27th, is now ranked 18th. The Oddtone is ranked 46th, with a very poor value at a longer distance indeed. All right, let's get into the specifics of each test. Before we get into all the explanations here, I also want to go over, if you're new to my channel, this is just my old testing versus the new testing. If you wanted to go into the specifics of what I tested in each test, I encourage you to jump to the later section of this video using the timestamps down below, where I go over specifics for each test, case airflow, through the CPU air cooler, and CFM testing, to give a detailed explanation of what is going on and why it's important and how the fans compare against each other. If you're familiar with this channel and the fans I've tested thus far, this gives you a brief overview of the fans' new placements versus their old ones. And if you just want to rewatch the data collection and the testing process, I encourage you to continue watching it. Otherwise, you can just take this brief overview and enjoy the rest of your day. All right, let's get into new testing versus... All right, first up in the grass is case simulation test. So the case simulation test can be looked at in a couple different key ways. First and foremost, it's what size case do you actually plan on buying? Are you getting a small case where the 6-inch mark matters? So this was a small case that is still a front to back airflow, as opposed to the ultra compact cases similar to the most recent one that pops into my mind is the Fractal Design North, where its side intake blows out the top or bottom intake blows out the top. So what I'm talking about with the 6-inch mark is still a front to back airflow. So it'd be a little bit on the bigger side for small form factor, but still small form factor nonetheless. The other key point for the 6-inch mark is if you have a case a lot like the Torrent or the Fractal Design Torrent, or you have bottom mounted fans that blow up towards your GPU, that is a short distance and would be representative of that 6-inch mark. So those are the two main scenarios for the 6-inch point. The 9-inch mark is representative of compact towers, front to back airflow, and for all these is assuming that you're using an air cooler. If you're using an AAO, a radiator, or something more exotic, this data is not quite as applicable to you unless you're using a single fan tower or single fan radiator. So like 140 or 120 millimeter just rad sticking at the back of your case, then this data is important to you. But in general, for radiators and AOs, it doesn't quite matter as much. Next up for the 11-inch mark. The 11-inch mark is representative of your standard mid-towers. Something like the Corsair 550D, the current generation Corsair like Stormtrooper looking case, or the Fractal Meshify 2C would be all representative of the 11-inch mark. Then the 14.5-inch mark is representative of large cases, something along the lines of the Fractal Design Torrent, actually, if you're putting the fans in the front of the case blowing to the back. That would be that 14.5-inch mark. The other way to look at this data is how good is this fan at blowing air? Ideally, in a perfect scientific world, if you're discounting all losses, the airspeed from the front of the case blowing all the way to the back would be a perfectly flat line. It would be no decrease in airspeed. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world. This is a picture actually of a ceiling fan, but you can see the spread out with air volume around it. So air on the edges is going to want to slow down the air that it comes in contact with, and then that cone spreads out as you get farther away from the fan until eventually the middle area is also slowed down to a perpetual crawl. But close enough to the fan, there's an inner cone area that maintains relatively high speed. So the point is to maintain as high a speed going from front of the case to the back of the case as possible. And personally, this is an older picture, but it was just the only one I could find representative. Static pressure fans, it doesn't matter if they have a concentrated airflow or a wide airflow. But in my personal opinion, I think that all fans should have a concentrated airflow because it makes them much more versatile. If a fan has a very wide pattern, it's less versatile. Basically, case in point, the Oddtone just drops in speed. It just tanks between the 6 to the 9-inch mark, pretty much going to 0. Anything under 0.5 meters per second is actually very hard for my anemometer to read accurately, where its actual minimum reading is 0.3 meters per second, which again is why I would like to get a more accurate and better one, but that costs $500 as opposed to $30-ish for my current one. But back to my key point here. So you want one that has a good concentrated airflow for pretty much most scenarios. and it just makes the fan much more versatile. Takeaway here is, if you're going to do like what Linus at LTT actually likes to talk about, where you put the fan on your radiator in a pull configuration, so your radiator is, sorry, I'm waving my mouse cursor up and down. So then the air pattern coming out of the fan would be just like it's an open airflow environment. So you do actually want a good concentrated airflow coming out of it to get from the front of the case to the back of the case, just to help encourage improved cooling throughout the case. If you're going to mount your radiator at the top of the case, so it's going to be like a chimney fashion, you still want the air to flow through the case, but the acceleration that the air gets from just pushing it through kind of matters a little bit less. But again, my opinion is I'd rather have the better airflow going through it than something that just tanks and you're relying on literally convection currents, forced convection currents inside the case to draw the air out. Having the air already moving just makes everything more efficient. And that's actually like the key point here, is you want the airspeed hitting your fans to be sucked out or sucked through the cooler at already as high an airspeed as possible. And that is because you don't want the air to slow down. You don't want to have the fans work extra hard just to re-accelerate the air through the components. So this is both going out of the case and going through like the radiator, AIO, air cooler. So now that detailed explanation is out of the way, these two graphs are lined up, except the A12x25 does have a 3.5 meters per second mark, while the Oddtone does not. But you can quickly see that the Oddtone is just not very good at case airflow applications. But let's get more specific with it. So this is my comparison graph. I have my control fan right here in aqua, and that is 3 parts A12x25 to 1 part A14. And the fans are blended together because 140 millimeter fans tend to do better at long distances, while 120 millimeter fans tend to do better at short distances because of their higher RPM immediate airflow. So blending the two fans together gets me what I consider a, maybe not perfect, but a closer to perfect fan than any one is individually. And as a result, I'm calling it a 130 millimeter fan. Sorry, that's a joke. So I have on here the A12x25, I also have on here the A14, and here at the bottom is the Oddtone. It is clearly in a very poor position and would not receive a recommendation as a case fan. How does it look at 100% PWM fan signaling? Well, for short distances, it is able to maintain a good airspeed, but if you're talking anything more substantial than a compact tower, it is atrocious, and again should be ignored as a case airflow. The A12x25 is excellent, matching my control fan. Of course, it is based off the control fan, so this should come to no surprise for anybody. The A14 is spinning at 1,490 RPM, and you can see why I averaged the fans together, because it is doing substantially better than the A12x25 at longer distances from the fan itself. How about comparing these fans versus other fans I've tested? Well, right here's the Oddtone in the purple, basically going to 0. This pink line is the NF-S12B, doing fairly poorly. Then we have the Wonder Snail, which I actually consider still to be pretty good, but it doesn't have the same sort of high power a lot of fans have, but it just doesn't lose airspeed as readily, indicating that's actually a very good design. It just needs a more powerful motor, in my opinion. And then right here in this highlighted dark pinkish red is the A12x25, being right up towards the top of the graphs, but having a relatively steep drop off. Mind, it still maintains a fairly good position, but it's a little bit steeper than what we'd like to see. So the Tough Fan 12 kind of beats it at the end, but doesn't quite have the same sort of grunt at the beginning. The General Typhoon is slightly better than the A12x25, except for at longer distances. It's a little bit less efficient. The Arctic P12 starts off lower and then ends up is at the best at 14.5 inches. So if you're looking at very large cases and you want to get a 120 millimeter size fan, the P12 looks like it's the best. But so this is why I bring up what size case are you actually getting so that you get the best fan for your case. Like the Masterfan SF120M performed ridiculously well at mini distances. Next up, 100% PW fan signaling. We got the Iceberg Thermal, which is one of my current top ranked fans, but it's also spinning at a redonkulous 3,000 RPM, but producing a substantial amount of airflow. The A12x25 is sitting right in the middle of the pack, not a bad place to be. The middle of the pack being other 120 or 2,100 RPM fans or thereabouts. So the Tough Fan 12 is a little bit slower and is a little bit lower on the graphs. Who else is around here? This green line belongs to the Wonder Snail, showing its stuff. We got this Aqua, that's the Masterfan SF120M. The P12 is in here. So it's just a good place to be. The Oddtone starts off looking pretty good and then just tanks itself, which is why it just does not get a recommendation. Also, what doesn't get a recommendation is the S12B. So how does it do? So I need to back up a second. I'm jumping ahead of myself. The 9-inch mark. The 9-inch mark is chosen because most fans have a drop in airspeed between the 6 and the 9-inch mark, but usually they don't completely tank like the Oddtone. So I needed a point where there's enough airspeed for me to get readings. Unfortunately for this one, the Oddtone is really bad. So it means it gets no improvement in airspeed as our noise increases until very high RPMs. So it does not receive a recommendation at all as a Kersphere fan. So that's why the 9-inch mark was chosen, because it was trying to figure out where I could still get good airspeed to get consistent measurements and show the differences between good airflow fans and not good airflow fans. And then sometimes we get extreme results like the Oddtone. The A12x25, on the other hand, is in an excellent position towards the top of the graph, but it is not the best, amazingly enough. There are other fans that are better than it in my testing. Oddtone / Teucer. Oddtone. A12x25 new testing methodology. NF A12x25. Okay, the next set of graphs is airspeed through my CPU AirCooler. My cooler is the Noctua U12A. It is a 120 millimeter class cooler. And my control fan is listed in blue, the A12x25 is in red, and the Oddtone is in purple. On both of these graphs, better fans are going to be sitting top left, worse fans are going to be sitting bottom right. Let's focus on the left graph first. Left graph is RPM versus airspeed. This is a blade efficiency graph. It is how good is this blade design at pushing air through a CPU air cooler. This specific cooler, but in general a pressure type application. So we can see that both fans are very close in result to my control fan. Matter of fact, at higher RPMs, they tend to outpace my control fan. And once again, the control fan is still based off of the A12x25 and the A14. On the right graph, we have noise versus airspeed. So this is a noise efficiency graph. This is how much air can the fan push for a given noise level. So this one is arguably more important for us as the user, as opposed to being more scientific, which is the left one. So what do we see? Well, the control fan and the A12x25 line up near on perfectly, while the Oddtone is off by a little bit. It's not in a terrible position, but it is obviously noisier. So it's 2.5 to 3 decibels noisier than my control fan. But let's take a different view and see how it looks compared to other fans. So first, a little bit of explanation about what we're taking a look at here. You'll see these numbers off to the side in this key. So 130 W, so that's watts, equals 0.5. So I actually did a whole series of tests on my U12A cooler where I controlled the PWM fan signal. I did a CPU only load on my CPU. I then adjusted the PWM fan signal on the fan and recorded how much airspeed was coming out of my cooler at every signal point, and recorded what wattage my CPU was drawing for that airspeed. So I was able to create basically a graph chart and do some estimation calculation for what given wattage or what given airspeed would give me what wattage. Mind, fan to fan will have some variation in this result because not every fan blows air the exact same way, but it gives a good general rule of thumb. If you have the same cooler as me and the same CPU as me, I have the i7 11700K CPU. If you've got those two things the exact same as me, this should get you close to within plus or minus probably 5 watts. But I want you to take that with a grain of salt, because if you do have a different CPU than me, the wattages may not line up. If you've got a different cooler than me, the wattages may not line up. So then, Bill, how can we use this data? Well, you can use it as a comparison standpoint. So this is noise normalized results. Let's say you have the FK120. This is a deep cool fan. Well, it's moving 0.6 meters per second of air for that given 12 decibel noise level. Well, if you upgrade to the A12x25, you're now going to be moving 1.3 meters per second of air for that same noise level. That is a huge improvement, like utterly substantial. That means that if you have a locked CPU, so a non-K, or you've limited the clock speeds on it for AMD so that they won't just spike forever, you're now going to be running your CPU cooler. If you have an overclocking CPU, you now have extra thermal headroom, or the CPU can run at a higher wattage for that same noise level. Or if you find my noise level noisy, my 12 decibel mark that I'm listing as, well, you can take this extra overhead, back off the PWM fan signal a little bit, and now the computer will run a little bit quieter for the same amount of cooling potential. And then I have these boxes next to other fans that are of similar design to the A12X25, so that basically General Typhoon style fans, you know, that curved blade design, just to highlight different variations in that blade design to show off where they place and rank as quasi highlighted, even though they're not the main focus of this video. Next up, 100% PWM fan signaling. How does it look? We have the same sort of key off to the side. Well, the Oddtone and A12X25 are very closely ranked. They are functionally equivalent, according to my anemometer. However, I test the fans 3 passes and average the results. And I do generate a line curve to calculate results. So the A12X25 does outperform the Oddtone by a little bit. They're very close, but the A12X25 is more performant and at a lower noise value, which is very important in most cases, because you don't want the fan to make a racket, do you? And over here on the left side of the graph, you have the fan name, the RPM was running, and the noise level was generating. And once again, as a note, noise does not scale linearly. It scales exponentially. So every 10 decibels is a doubling in noise value. So if you're looking at a fan that is 20 decibels to one that is 30 decibels, the 30 decibel one is twice as loud. So I just want to make that perfectly clear. But both these two fans actually rank kind of in the middle. Surprisingly, there are many fans that are spinning at lower RPMs that are better in performance than the A12X5 through CPU air coolers. particularly my cooler, because that's what this is most applicable to, but coolers in general. But they certainly would not be bad choices, especially the A12x25, which is fairly quiet given its overall performance value. Moving on to cooler airspeed versus decibel level. So this is better fans are going to be sitting in the top left, worse fans are going to be sitting in the bottom right. The Oddtone is functionally towards the bottom, but it's not in the worst position. That is very important to note. This teal line belonging to the Silent Wings 4 Pro gets that. I would say that the A12x25 is in a good position, while the Oddtone is kind of in a poor position. Moving on to CFM testing. So CFM is my least favorite test in terms of determining if a fan is good or not, depending on how the reviewer is trying to use it. So a lot of reviewers out here on the internet seem to not understand what a CFM test really is looking at. So at its core, CFM is just cubic feet per minute. You have your tube, you know the diameter, the inner diameter, you know pi. So diameter divided by 2 gives you r. So r squared times pi, pi r squared. You have the surface area of the circle! We did math! Okay, so now you've got feet squared. You have the airspeed of the fan going down the tube. So that's feet per minute, or whatever airspeed you want to do, but you need to make sure your units are consistent. So feet per minute times feet squared. So feet squared times feet is feet cubed. Now, feet cubed per minute. Cubic feet per minute. CFM. Hooray! We did math today. But the reason I don't like CFM testing for case airflow, specifically case airflow, and that's how a lot of reviewers, like Hardware Canucks, uses this data, is that it doesn't give room for the air to spread out. A lot like what I talked about during my case airflow test. So this is not a great picture because my fan is actually the exact size of this tube. But in effect, you're blowing air down a tube. There's no room for the air to spread out. So that means all the air is going to be traveling down the tube. And if a fan design has a tendency to spread the air out versus, let's say, the exact same design, but one had a frame that had a tendency to focus the air. So we're just talking about focusing the air versus spreading it out. Everything else is the same. They're going to look much more similar in performance in this test than what we saw in my case airflow simulation test. So this is lying to you. Now, that doesn't mean CFM testing is completely invalid. It just has a different use case. The one use case where it is valid is if you're looking at airflow through your heatsink or radiator or whatever. Then you can do CFM testing on it. You just have your anemometer at the back. You know the surface area of the area coming out, and you can calculate CFM. That is perfectly valid and okay. Number two, you want to do scientific testing to figure out the general performance and pressure type applications for a fan. So you'd be generating PQ curves, pressure airflow. So you'd have a little hole over here on one side of different sizes or different restriction level, and you'd be running your fan through it, and you'd have a pressure gauge on each side of that restriction, and you'd be able to generate all sorts of cool data to determine how good this particular fan was at in-static pressure type applications. That's what Noctua does as a baseline test. It's a very valid way of testing out a fan. Third way for doing CFM testing, well, this is actually making a wind tunnel. So you'd have that tube, and you could have your airfoil sitting on the inside, and you just want to see how aerodynamics work or something like that, your test model for a drag. Well, your CFM tube is very valid because you can still measure how much airflow is traveling through it, and you actually do need to measure that, and not just no PWM fan signaling. And it's kind of a side topic, but the other way you can do CFM is for total case airflow design. So pretending that this is your computer case. So Fractal Design Torrent would actually be pretty representative of this. I have no fans in the back. I have my cooler somewhere in the middle. The front fan's right there, blowing air through the case. I could put my anemometer in a couple locations along the back of it and average a total case airflow traveling through the case to get essentially an effective CFM. Or if you had a chimney style case, So you blow the air out the top. You could calculate the amount of air traveling out the top and get a CFM value of total air exiting your case. That is another valid way. But just having a tube and saying, hey, this is how good this fan is at blowing air through your case, when all you've done is blow air down a tube, is completely incorrect. I just want to make that clear, and that's why I don't particularly like this test, unless you're looking at it for heatsink and radiator testing. Anyways, so what are we looking at? It's very similar to what we saw with the through the heatsink test. Better fans are top left, worse fans are bottom right. We have RPM versus CFM. We have noise versus CFM, so blade efficiency or noise efficiency. And we see that in terms of blade efficiency, they're all pretty well lined up with each other. And in noise efficiency, the Oddtone is trash. Next up is noise normalized testing. The A12x25 is kicking ass at the top of the graph. The Oddtone is sitting at the bottom of the graph, not doing so hot. However, once we crank things up to 100% PWM fan signaling, actually the A12x25 is kicking, well, maybe not kicking butt, but it is shifted towards the top of the graph. It's the bottom of the top fans. There are very few fans that are better than it that aren't spinning faster than 2,100 RPM. The Storm 120 is doing really well, but it's noisier. And the Oddtone is sitting more or less at the bottom of the graph. It's just frankly not that impressive. And then we have CFM versus decibels, and the Oddtone is sitting at the bottom. If you're wondering why some of these fans have these joggles, I don't think I mentioned this before, but these joggles are where I hit a harmonic frequency, either with the fan or within the testing apparatus acting with the fan. It's hard to determine exactly which is happening, but I hit a harmonic, and that's where the fan gets really noisy before you exit the harmonics, and it drops back in noise again. The A12x25 is, well, it starts off not doing that great, and then we start hitting its better airflow to ratio noise curves, and it starts doing really quite well overall. And we have the Gentle Typhoon here in teal, and the T30 is in there, and we've got the Silentwings 4 Pro 120. All right, let's move on to the value proposition. So the Oddtone's at the top, and it's a $13 fan, and the A12x25 is at the bottom, and it is a $32 fan. So very dramatic difference in price. So in the value proposition, it's literally a very simple calculation. I thought about doing a way where I'd take noise into account a little bit differently, but in the end I decided to stick with this, where it's just dollars per how much performance this fan has, or how much performance this fan has per dollar. So that's meters per second per dollar. And we have the left side will always be noise normalized, the right side will always be 100% PWM fan signaling, and I'll describe which which data set we're actually taking a look at. So this is the 6-inch noise normalized and 100% PWM fan signaling. On my case airflow test, and the Oddtone is pretty good value overall at the 6-inch mark, much better than the A12x25, but it is a far cry from our top value pick, which is the TLG12. When we crank things up to 100% PWM fan signaling, both fans do kind of better. However, the A12x25 is shifted towards the bottom in terms of this value, while the Oddtone is actually taken a really good position overall, but it's still a far cry from the best. And this would be a great time for me to mention, who is this data set actually best for? Well, if you're trying to pinch every penny you can in your build, completely understandable. Computers are really expensive these days. So you're just trying to stretch your dollar as far as you can. And fans are last on your list, so you're just trying to get the best fans for the least amount of money. This is where you're going to live and breathe and pick out the best fan you can. So everything but the CFM testing can be directly compared with each other. This is 120s and 140s because they use the same testing apparatus. In the CFM testing, 120 and 140 millimeter fans use a different testing apparatus, so they cannot be directly compared against each other. If you've got a mixed budget, so you have a little bit of extra money to spend, you want a fan that's a little bit quieter. You want one that has a little bit higher performance. You want a little bit of RGB, whatever it may be. This is where you take this data and use it in comparison with the previous graphs to determine which fan best suits your particular needs, And if you've got unlimited budget, well, you should buy an Noctua. I mean, you should actually get whichever fan suits your particular set of needs. If you just want to get the best RGB on the planet, pretty much you're going to be buying lian-li. If you want to get the best performance for longevity, well, you're probably going to be getting a Noctua. But at that point, it's your choice where to spend your money. At the 11-inch mark in value proposition, well, the Oddtone has a fantastic score, ranking definitely at the best of a value of 0. Because it has no airspeed. The fan is trash at bigger cases. The A12x25 just destroys it with its value proposition here. But realistically, they're not the top value picks. There are other fans that are just substantially better in value. So I encourage you to actually watch those videos. I don't know when each fan video is going to be published with each other, but the data set already exists. Next up, CPU AirCooler testing. The Oddtone is actually a pretty good pick. So if you want a fan that looks sort of like a Noctua, but is white, because Noctua hasn't come out with their white fans yet, it has potential, but how long it will survive is a different matter. I would like to add longevity testing to my testing suite. However, it is currently outside my testing capability. Stated before, if you like my video format, have suggestions for me, whatever, subscribe. I appreciate if you join me on Patreon. It would just really help me out in being able to really grow as a channel to be the absolute best on YouTube for fan testing data. But at 100%, the Oddtone is still doing pretty well, but it's still a far cry from the top value picks. And last, but certainly not least, is CFM testing. And it's kind of a similar story to the cooler testing. The Oddtone does pretty well, but it's just far away from the top picks. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. And where does that leave me with the conclusion to this overall? Well, I would say that the Oddtone is okay if you don't need to blow air a long distance. So smaller cases, you need something for a radiator, or you just want something to do wind tunnel testing. It would be a just fine fan for that. As a case airflow fan in general, though, I would not recommend it at all, period, end of story. I do think it was a bit on the noisy side when compared to the other fans. Whether that bothers you is up to you. But as for me, it doesn't really get my recommended pick. The Noctua A12x25, I have 4 of these fans, so I absolutely love it, and I think it's worth it. But that is me, and I pay for it with my own hard-earned money, and if it's not the same for you, then that is perfectly okay. They are $32 fans. You spend your own money the way you should. So with that, I'm going to go to our wrap-up section, and alrighty. Now that we've finished everything, at the end of every video, I like to show off my raw data. You are welcome to use this data for your own personal use. This is the A12x25. But if you want to use it in any sort of publication, written, journal, video, I do ask that you reference me and my channel. I'm the one who generated this data, and it belongs to me. Each fan takes me around an hour and a half to 2 hours to do this level of testing. And obviously, I just finished retesting all these fans. So that was a substantial amount of time that I've devoted into this. It is a labor of love. I was very unhappy with other channels' testing methodology with fan testing, so I decided to take my own crack at it. If you've got suggestions on fans you want me to review, please leave them in the comment section down below. If you've got constructive criticism, keyword constructive, I take all feedback seriously on ways to improve my videos to make them overall better for you, the viewer. Anything else? Consider supporting me by subscribing and checking out my Patreon page. I know it's small. I'm still figuring that part out. I'm just trying to get this channel growing so I can generate even better data, because I actually would really, really like to do that. Just be the best. But anyways, I do appreciate each and every one of you for watching, especially making it this far. If you got questions about fans, leave in the comments down below. I'll try to answer them as best as I can. I am an aerospace engineer, and I hope to see you next time here on Computer Tech and More.